It's great to welcome Glenn Korn to the Cipher Brief studio. Glenn, of course, is a former senior intelligence operations officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. Has served as chief of station and just has a profound sort of background in understanding how all of this comes together and the importance of the intelligence aspects of this. Big picture, Glenn, you're sitting in Tel Aviv today, looking at sort of trying to figure out how the bomb assessment is all coming together to figure out just how much damage you've done in Iran. What else is your focus at this very moment?
Well, if I'm, talking from the perspective of an American, I would say, one, we've got to be very alert to potential terrorism, lethal threats from the Iranians or their proxies around the world. The Iranians invested quite a bit themselves and through their proxies in developing a robust lethal capability around the world. They've used that in the past. Unfortunately, for example, in Lebanon, we lost a lot of people at the hands of Hezbollah, which was all directed by Tehran in the 80s. The president, referred to what happened in Iraq, the way that the Iranians were using their proxies and the Quds Force to target Americans there and our allies. So, we can go down a long list, but we need to be very, very alert. I think probably the proxies have been seriously hurt by the Israeli operation starting in 2023. And I have to say, I think that the U.S. intelligence community and law enforcement community kind of woke up to the threat after being so focused on Al Qaeda for many years, earlier than all this. So I'm hopeful that we can identify and disrupt most of these threats. I saw, for example, I think the British arrested a Azeri citizen working in Cyprus, who they believe has ties to the Quds Force. So that's the kind of disruption we're going to need to see. But of course, even if one terrorist attack gets through, that's a terrible thing. And the Iranians have demonstrated they will use terrorism as a weapon against their enemies. And
I want to get some response from you, Glenn, if I can, sort of regionally. And I have a few kind of key questions I want to ask you. But you just returned from Lebanon, where you spent some time meeting with a lot of senior leaders there. I know that we've talked in the past about this push against the Lebanese government to sort of distance themselves more from Lebanese Hezbollah at this point. Can you give us some highlights as well about sort of the tone in the region there and what some of the pressures and stresses are?
Sure. The Israeli operations and Nasrallah's mistake in agreeing to Iran's program against Israel and after October 7th, 2023, had tragic consequences or serious consequences for Hezbollah. The Israelis did an amazing job of kind of what they're doing now in Iran. Their intelligence seemed to be superb. Their technological capability to execute operations and targeting was superb. And they damaged Hezbollah in a way that I don't think anybody expected. And certainly, I heard no U.S. experts on 7 October. In fact, we were at Sea Island when this is, we talked about this. And, I don't think anybody predicted that the Israelis would be so successful in going after Hezbollah. So Hezbollah has been seriously weakened. It opened the way or the door for the Lebanese to conduct elections, which had been on hold or blocked by Hezbollah and Iran for 2 years prior to that. They've elected a president. They have formed a government. Now the challenge is there's pressure on that government, including from Washington and definitely from Tel Aviv, to completely disarm Hezbollah. And most of the Lebanese officials we spoke with were of the opinion that they can't move too quickly in doing that they have to find a political solution with the Shia community in Lebanon. And as part of that solution, they need investment, they need aid to help rebuild mostly southern Lebanon, where the Israelis were most, where Hezbollah was based, and the southern suburbs of Beirut, which took a beating at the hands of the Israelis. And now the government needs to replace, the way that Hezbollah became so powerful is the Iranians invested in winning hearts and minds through building roads, schools, providing social services. The government of Lebanon now needs to do that. They recognize that, but they don't have the means to do it. And they also claim that the Lebanese armed forces is not ready to take on the mission of trying to disarm Hezbollah, and they'll have to do it at the same time that they're disarming Palestinian groups in Lebanon to maintain, some kind of balance between the Sunni and the Shia. in the country, right? Without inflaming one side or the other or creating an imbalance. So this is an important issue. There's a lot of pressure on the Lebanese government to take action. I think that the U.S. position has been, we're not going to provide significant aid until you disarm Hezbollah completely, which is what the Israelis want. The Israeli position is, until you disarm Hezbollah, we're going to continue to strike Hezbollah targets in your country because they're a direct threat to Israel. We've seen that. And of course, the Lebanese claim, the legitimate Lebanese government claims that when the Israelis do that, it just makes it harder for them to actually get Hezbollah to disarm, and it inflames the Shia community. Now, I will say that after the Israelis started this operation and the Iranians started to respond, some of the feedback I'm getting from my Lebanese contacts is the Shia community now is upset with Iran, asking, where was Iran? Where were all these ballistic missiles when they were being decimated by the Israelis? The Iranians really did nothing. They left them high and dry. And so the Shia community, and if I were a member of that community, I would be upset too, because the Iranians failed. They pushed them into this war, and then they failed to protect them. They failed to provide any kind of real significant response to the Israelis. So it'll be interesting going forward to see how the Lebanese government can manage this. It's, Lebanon is an extremely complicated country. The political system is very, very delicate, complicated, and they have quite a bit that they have to do, because of Hezbollah's negative influence for years, and because of some of the other issues that, the way that the government is structured.
Glenn, let me ask you then, what do you think the response generally will be in Lebanon to these strikes? And I guess importantly, on how Iran does or doesn't respond to these strikes?
So as of now, Hezbollah, short of a few statements, in support of Iran, they have not done anything from what I know. Again, my Lebanese contacts say that so far it's calm. Hezbollah either is not in a position to do anything significant, or they don't want the Israelis to come after them harder because they paid a price after 2023 or since 2023, and they know that the Israeli intelligence is, I would call it, exquisite. I mean, they really have demonstrated a great intelligence capability, which they've tied to their lethal targeting of their enemies. The Shia community there, I agree with the Lebanese officials that we spoke with. They have got to, and I think we should help them provide an alternative to Iran or some other actor which is not acting in U.S. best interest to fill the vacuum that was created when the Iranians were unable to fund Hezbollah the way they were before because of the Israeli operations and because of the loss of Syria, the Assad regime, which cut off their main line of communication. So I should mention, the Iranians were still trying to fund Hezbollah and find ways to get money into Lebanon to fund the organization, to keep it as strong as possible and maybe even rebuild it. But the Lebanese authorities told us they're working very hard to stop that as best they can. So what's going to happen going forward? I don't think that Hezbollah as an organization is ready yet to take on the Israelis or the Americans. Obviously, if you're in Beirut, you have to be very concerned that Hezbollah may target Americans. Again, we have an ugly history there. But what I'm really concerned with is fringe groups within Hezbollah or other fringe groups that are associated with Hezbollah that may decide that even if the leadership of Hezbollah is not giving them the green light to take some kind of lethal action, they will decide that they want to do something because they're so frustrated.
And this would be like one-off targeting opportunity.
One-off targeting, yeah. I mean, people that are well-trained may have access to explosives, weapons, cyber capabilities. So, we probably have to put that on the table too. The Iranians have a capability. Hezbollah had a capability. So you just have to be very aware of that.
Yeah. Glenn, let me ask you, let's move, if we can, for a moment to Turkey. I mean, Turkey is such a strategic regional player, partner to the U.S. in many ways, frustration in some other ways. How are the strikes, the U.S. strikes, and sort of joining the Israelis in this attack on these facilities in Iran, how is Turkey likely to respond to that?
Well, the Turks are extremely concerned about a mass influx of refugees into Turkey. The Turks will tell you that they bore the brunt of the Syrian refugee crisis during the Syrian civil war. It had a serious impact on Turkish politics, the economy. I should mention that it is not true that they had the largest number of, it is true they had the largest number of Syrian refugees, although Lebanon per capita had a higher number that went to Lebanon. So I have to say that. And it's probably more sensitive for Lebanon because of the religious breakdown of the country and the way that the government is organized. So especially the Christian community and the Shia community were concerned with the influx of Syrian refugees into Lebanon during the civil war. In Turkey, it's also had political impact. It's had economic impact for sure. And I think the estimate I read in some of the Turkish media is the Minister of maybe Interior put out that they're worried about 3 million, up to 3 million refugees arriving. They already have a large number of refugees, Iranian refugees in Turkey already. And I would say, too, when we go back to the issue of terrorism, when we go back to the issue of instability, that's something you have to watch very carefully, too, because the Iranians have conducted many operations inside of Turkey, including against American targets. And we do have an air base at Incirlik. We have U.S. forces in the country, and we have a large diplomatic presence and business presence. Mm-hmm. So all things that we have to watch. And I'm sure that the people that are tasked with doing that are watching it, but it's a tough mission. I do want to say that I have some experience working the Iran issue in my career, and I have to say that the people that work like the Iran threat stuff were the best officers I ever worked with. They're incredible group of Americans. Yes, I'm sure they're working long hours right now, but God bless them because they really were some of the most dedicated and talented officers I saw. And I love them.
Glenn, somebody else who's likely watching this pretty closely is Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is a strike against one of these four countries that have become known as the axis of authoritarianism. China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And you haven't seen overtly any real signs other than offers by China and Russia to negotiate some kind of a peace deal here before the strikes. What do you think the perspective is from the Kremlin on this right now, and why does that matter?
Well, first I would start by saying, Vladimir Putin must be asking himself, how did the Israelis, and then conduct this operation, their intelligence being what it was, the precision in the way that the Israelis conducted their strikes, commando operations, special operations on the ground inside of Iran. It's right after the Ukrainians ran their spiderweb operation, which was also a very, very impressive operation. If I'm Vladimir Putin, who himself is a former intelligence officer, I'd be kind of envious. And then he sees the U.S. deliver 6 of these large pieces of ordnance halfway around the world with precision. I'd also, that in a way is a slap in the face to the Kremlin, in my opinion. And it should be a wake-up call to the Russians. I think the Russians know that our military is very, very capable, and all their threats at Washington, when they direct them at Washington, I think realistically they know that they can't go toe-to-toe with the U.S. military, and they shouldn't. No one wants that, but if they push that way, I think they're going to pay a huge price. Putin is trying to insert himself into the negotiations. He's been offering to President Trump that he can help. My advice to President Trump would be, don't take that help. The Russians have been of no assistance to the U.S. on the Iran issue for years. They've actually been a thorn in our side, I would argue. They were working against our interests. So I don't think he's being sincere, but he wants to get some role in all this. And of course, we also have to ask, he failed to support Assad when Assad was in trouble. He didn't have the means to do it. And now the Iranians are on the ropes. And it's, so far the Russians have not done much. I've heard some people say that he may try and provide military assistance to the Iranians. I am skeptical of that because I think they're struggling themselves to sustain their war against Ukraine. And I think actually what's going on is threatening Putin because it's cutting off an important supply line for him. Most of the drones, as you know, when we go to Ukraine, those drones that are buzzing over our hotel and being shot down by Ukrainian air defense units, those are Shaheeds. Made in Iran or designed in Iran and maybe built in Russia, but my understanding is they're building them now in Russia, but with Iranian parts. So this war is definitely going to have an impact on Putin. I'm guessing he's happy that oil prices are rising but I'm guessing that his partner in Beijing is not. That's not a good thing for the
Yeah.
Chinese economy, right? So there's a tension there. And, I think Putin's probably worried he's going to lose his other big ally in the Middle East. And that would be a big problem for the Russians right now. It would be good for the rest of the world, in my opinion, except for Belarus and maybe North Korea.
Well, yeah,
But
if this were to lead to regime change, Glenn, it seems that that would be a huge problem for Putin, who, as you mentioned, is really relying on the assembly, really, of these Shahed drones for a big part of his campaign in Ukraine, too.
yeah, the other thing is, President Trump on all this, there's a lot of speculation. I mean, I can't speak for the president, but a lot of speculation that he was manipulating everybody. For example, when he said, I'm going to take 2 weeks to decide, up to 2 weeks to decide on whether I strike. And then they struck very quickly. There's a lot of suspicion that even the negotiations with the Iranians that were being conducted were part of some kind of deception operation to help distract the Iranians so that the Israelis could strike. I don't know if that's true or not. But, for me, I think the message here for Putin has to be the U.S. does have a red line, and we've given Putin plenty of chances to negotiate on Ukraine, and he's not taking those opportunities. In fact, he's even more belligerent, recently saying that he could take all of Ukraine in an economic forum in St. Petersburg.
Yeah,
So
it's been
if
really
I
interesting.
if I'm Putin, this is going to make me try and figure out, okay, what is the president of the United States really doing, and what is his red line, and do we really understand the Americans like we think we do? Because I think sometimes we have been too by some kind. We use the same playbook over and over again. Trump is definitely breaking the mold there, and if I'm a foreign leader, especially that has hostile intent towards the United States, I think twice now about assuming that I can just guess what the American playbook's going to be. It's a whole different world.
Yeah, just kind of in closing, Glenn, I'm really interested to get an idea from you of the indicators that you're going to be looking for of escalation in this case, the signs that things may be going in a way that could be even more dangerous.
If the Iranians go after some of our allies in the region, they go after oil and gas infrastructure. Of course, if they go after the Strait of Hormuz, try and shut it down, maritime shipping. If we see a series of attempted, or hopefully I'll say attempted because hopefully they'll be disrupted, but terrorist attacks, lethal operations, large scale cyber operations, those are things I'd be looking for. Um, how long the Iranians can continue to sustain their targeting of Israel. That's important to see. The Israelis are trying to take out their ability to strike Israel, but so far, unfortunately, they continue to land some strikes, and it's costing the lives of civilians. By the way, also important to stress here, it seems the Iranians think that they can get away with just striking civilian targets, including a hospital, and most of the world isn't reacting to that. Although it's very surprising to me because that is not like the way to wage war. In my opinion, that is a violation of the rules of war. Probably
Yeah.
because they don't have the intelligence or the capabilities that the Israelis have. So we'll see how much longer they can sustain launching rockets at Israel. Hopefully not much longer. And of course, if they go after U.S. forces in the region or a U.S. diplomatic facility, I think all bets are off. I think they must understand that the U.S. will get deeply involved in a way that will significantly amplify what the Israelis have already done.
Yeah, do you think they'd be thinking twice about that at this moment?
I hope
Glenn
so.
Thorne, former senior officer with the CIA, thank you so much for bringing your very valuable perspective, I think, to this, Glenn, as we're trying to sort of sort out what all these headlines mean and what some of the indicators are that we should all be looking out for. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and praying for our troops and our allies in the region.